Part 1. The Story of a Nation Divided, the Cherokee Feud and the Loss of a Homeland. The history of the Cherokee people in the 19th century is a tragic tale of a nation at war with itself. It's a story of a people who fundamentally changed their way of life to survive, only to face a series of devastating betrayals. At its heart were two powerful and influential men, both slaveholders and of Cherokee and European descent, who would shape the destiny of the Cherokee Nation, John Ross and Stand Watie. The government chose to manipulate and deceive the Cherokee Nation, rather than conquer them through military force because a direct military campaign was strategically unfeasible and too costly. This was due to a combination of factors: vast territory and elusive population. The Cherokee's ancestral homeland spanned multiple states, making it logistically difficult for a large army to occupy. A direct military conquest would have required a long and expensive campaign against a dispersed population. Superior knowledge of the land. The Cherokee people knew the rugged terrain of their homeland better than anyone else. This gave them a significant advantage in any conflict, allowing them to evade and outmaneuver a conventional army. Decentralized political structure. The traditional Cherokee government was based on the consensus of clan leaders and a council, not a single central authority. There was no one leader to defeat or force into signing a treaty that would be accepted by the entire nation. Because of these obstacles, the U.S. government's strategy shifted. Instead of trying to conquer a resilient and widespread people, they sought to manipulate their political structure from within. The U.S. government's strategy was to push for a centralized Cherokee government with a principal chief, creating a single point of contact for negotiations. This approach was intended to simplify the process of land cession by bypassing the traditional consensus-based system. However, this plan backfired with the rise of Principal Chief John Ross, a shrewd political leader who refused to negotiate a removal treaty. Instead of fighting a war he knew they couldn't win, Ross strategically used the U.S. government's own legal system against it. He appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, citing past treaties that recognized the Cherokee Nation's sovereignty. The court's ruling in Cherokee Nation v. Georgia in 1831, while not a total victory, was a pivotal moment. In the ruling, Chief Justice John Marshall famously described the Cherokee Nation as a domestic dependent nation, a relationship akin to a ward to his guardian. This legal framework, while acknowledging the Cherokee's right to their land, also gave the U.S. government a paternalistic excuse to act for their own good, even if it was against their will. This legal loophole provided the U.S. government with the pretext it needed to move forward with forced removal. Despite the Cherokee Nation's steadfast refusal to cede its territory, this small fraction of Cherokees are the ones responsible for the forced removal. Major Ridge, Elias Boudinot, Andrew Ross, John Ridge, George Adair, James Starr, such as William Lastly, John Gunter, John Fields, Testeski, Tyeska, and Stand Watie, and overseen by U.S. officials. They used a group of individuals to negotiate and sign the fraudulent Treaty of New Echota with a small, unrepresentative faction, thereby securing the land without a large-scale military conflict. This strategic deception set the stage for a period of profound internal conflict within the Cherokee Nation. A nation in transition. For generations, the Cherokee people lived in a vast ancestral homeland that spanned thousands of square miles in what are now the states of North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. Their society was deeply rooted in a sophisticated yet decentralized government system that reflected the dual nature of their existence, peace and war. Leadership was balanced between two principal governments, the peacekeeping government and the war government. The bedrock of this governance was the clan system of 7 clans, with descent and identity passed down through the mother's line. This matrilineal structure was crucial for maintaining the clan's integrity and loyalty. Children were raised primarily by their clan, with the mother's brother serving as the most important male authority figure. The biological father, belonging to a different clan, his mother's, held primary loyalty to his own clan and its children. The uncle's role was to educate, protect, and mentor his nieces and nephews, ensuring their unbreakable allegiance to their own clan's traditions, values, and members, thereby guaranteeing the continuity of the clan itself. The term chief is not a native Cherokee word. It is a European term that comes from the Old French word chief, which means head or leader. This word was used by European colonists to describe native leaders because their own governments were accustomed to a top-down hierarchy. The Cherokee had their own titles and system of leadership. The introduction of the title and the concept of a single permanent national leader was a direct result of the Cherokee Nation's interaction with European and American colonizers. Leadership was not based on a single leader for the entire nation, but on a decentralized system where each town had its own dual leadership. The government was made up of two distinct parts, a white government for peace and a red government for war. The White Council, which governed during times of peace, managed internal affairs and social ceremonies. It was led by a peace headman and a council of elders. The Red Council, which was active during conflict, focused on military strategy and external threats. It was led by a war headman and war counselors. Each town council was composed of leaders from the 7 clans, ensuring that all major decisions were made through consensus. This structure prevented power from being concentrated in one person. Each town had peacekeeping leaders, also called beloved men or ata gila ganohi, to manage internal affairs, and war leaders to handle external threats and warfare. These leaders were chosen based on their wisdom, character, and demonstrated abilities. Authority was not concentrated in a single overarching leader for the entire nation. Instead, the real power resided in a council of elders and clan leaders, where representatives from each of the 7 clans ensured a consensus-based system where every clan had a voice. The revered beloved woman, Gigao, like Nanyehi, a moral and spiritual leader, provided guidance to all leaders and held the unique power to decide the fate of captives. She was also uniquely powerful because she held the title of Gigao, which she earned through her courage in battle. This meant she held authority within both the peace and war governments, embodying the complete duality of the Cherokee system. They lived in communal longhouses and relied on hunting and small-scale gardening for survival. However, by the early 1800s, this traditional way of life was under threat from the relentless pressure of white settlers and the U.S. government, which demanded that the Cherokee abandon their savage ways and assimilate. This pressure also fueled a growing resistance among traditionalists who viewed intermarriage and outsiders stepping in as direct threats to the clan system, fearing the loss of their cultural identity if children were no longer raised with primary loyalty to their mother's clan. The traditionalists saw that outsiders were deliberately targeting Cherokee women so that their children would be raised within the clan, thereby giving outsiders a path to influence and inherit land and power within Cherokee society. To assert their sovereignty and prove they were a civilized nation worthy of their land, a small faction of Cherokee began a profound cultural transformation. This shift was driven by assimilationist values that were diametrically opposed to the traditional ways. The assimilationist worldview centered on individualism, private property, and a patrilineal family structure where the father was the head of the household. They saw this as the only path to survival. The push for this new way of life was led by a growing elite of Cherokee people with mixed European and Cherokee ancestry, who had gained access to education and business connections through their fathers. They transitioned from living in communal longhouses to building individual, single-family cabins and homes. They embraced farming on individual plots of land, moving away from a hunting-based lifestyle. This change was partly influenced by figures like Nanyehi, a beloved woman. She had learned how to raise dairy cattle and weave from a white captive named Lydia Bean in the 1700s, and she knew the Cherokee needed to adapt to a different lifestyle to survive because their territory and resources were running out. She taught her people these skills. This shift away from communal living had a profound effect on the family structure. When the Cherokee of mixed ancestry moved from the longhouse to cabins with just the mother and father, they became isolated from the clan. The constant, daily influence of the mother's brother and the extended clan network was replaced by the authority of the biological father, who, in many cases, was of European descent. This isolation from traditional social structures made it easier for the children to be influenced by the patrilineal values and individualistic worldview of their fathers. This change in living and family structure effectively prepared the next generation to be more accepting of assimilationist ideas like private property. which fundamentally changed Cherokee society. In the 1700s, this same elite began to cultivate cotton as a major cash crop. The adoption of chattel slavery for monetary gain was a direct result of their decision to emulate the plantation economy of the wider southern United States, as they saw it as the most effective way to gain wealth and power in the new system. This new economic order led to the creation of a dual system of land ownership. While the Cherokee Constitution affirmed that all tribal lands were the common property of the nation, it also created a legal framework that recognized improvements on the land, such as buildings, fences, and farms, as the exclusive private property of the person who made them. This meant that while the nation held the ultimate title to the land, wealthy individuals could legally own, sell, and amass vast private estates in the form of these improvements. This system allowed the new elite to amass wealth and power while technically preserving the communal land ethic of the nation, though it created a profound and lasting socioeconomic divide. You can see how the US government and the states couldn't get what they wanted until the outsiders had babies, and it took about 20 years. And then change started happening because those babies weren't raised within the clans anymore. This is how the outside world effectively groomed John Ross and Stand Watie for positions of power. Their fathers, being of European descent, instilled in their sons a worldview and a set of skills that made them palatable to the US government. By the time they rose to prominence, they were seen as civilized and trustworthy by the very culture that threatened their people. Both men were products and leaders of this New Age worldview. John Ross's father, Daniel Ross, a Scottish immigrant, was a wealthy trader and landowner who held enslaved people. He met his wife, Molly, Mary MacDonald, who was a Cherokee woman with a Scottish father. John Ross was raised in a household that blended Cherokee and European ways, giving him a formal education and business acumen that would prove invaluable. Similarly, Stand Watie's father, David U. Watie, was of Cherokee and European descent, and his mother, Susanna Ridge, was a full-blood Cherokee woman. Stand Watie was raised in the affluent European-style world of his uncle Major Ridge at the forefront of the new economic order. The complex backgrounds of both men gave them a unique worldview that was at once fiercely Cherokee and profoundly shaped by the very culture that threatened their people. The rise of a new government and internal strife. By the 1820s, the Cherokee had made remarkable strides in their efforts to assert sovereignty and prove their civilized status. In 1821, a Cherokee silversmith named Sequoyah completed the development of a Cherokee syllabary. This was a remarkable achievement, as it allowed the Cherokee language to be written and read for the first time. It led to widespread literacy among the Cherokee people, an accomplishment that many white Americans at the time couldn't claim. This advancement was a source of great national pride and a powerful argument against the savage stereotype used to justify removal. The syllabary was so successful that by 1828, the Cherokee Nation began publishing its own bilingual newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix. However, not everyone embraced the new ways. In 1827, the internal divisions came to a head with the White Path Rebellion. Led by a traditionalist named White Path, this group of full-blood Cherokees opposed the adoption of the new centralized government and the very idea of assimilation. White Path believed that the nation's troubles were divine punishment for abandoning their ancestral ways. He and his followers briefly rebelled, demanding a return to the traditional political structure and a rejection of the assimilationist policies. The rebellion was quickly and peacefully suppressed by John Ross and Major Ridge, but it served as a clear warning of the deep-seated opposition to the constitutional changes. By 1827, to further assert their sovereignty, the Cherokee adopted a written constitution, modeled after the U.S. government. The U.S. government's push for a single principal chief was a strategic move to dismantle the Cherokees' decentralized system of checks and balances and make them easier to manipulate. This system of distributed power made it difficult for outsiders to negotiate a single binding deal. The U.S. government, accustomed to dealing with single leaders like a president or king, found this structure inconvenient. By pressuring the Cherokee to adopt a constitution with a principal chief, the U.S. government created a single point of failure they could exploit and manipulate. This also allowed them to bypass the traditional full-blood Cherokee leaders who were more resistant to assimilation and land cession in favor of those with mixed ancestry, like Ross and Ridge, who were seen as more civilized and trustworthy. The decision to adopt a new government was not a simple choice. It was an act of survival in response to immense pressure. This led to the creation of the title of Principal Chief, a European-style position that replaced the fluid, dual system. This new government, with a principal chief, a national council, and a judiciary, was intended to manage national affairs and relations with the outside world. It created a dual system where the traditional clan structure still governed social life, but the new constitutional government handled legal and political matters with increasing authority. It was signed by many key players, including John Ross and Major Ridge, as well as prominent men like Elias Boudinot, showing that the leaders of both sides were once aligned on a shared national goal. Despite these changes, a life-or-death crisis loomed under President Andrew Jackson, who was a strong advocate of Indian removal. Jackson made it clear he would not protect the Cherokee Nation from the state of Georgia, even after the Supreme Court ruled in the Cherokees' favor. John Ross, who had risen to the position of Principal Chief, led the National Party, which represented the majority of the Cherokee people and continued to fight legally for their land. In opposition was the Treaty Party, led by Major Ridge, his son John Ridge, and his nephew Stand Watie. They believed that resistance was futile and that a treaty was the only way to salvage anything. The Betrayal and the Feud. In December 1835, a small group of the Treaty Party signed the Treaty of New Echota, ceding all Cherokee lands for $5 million. This act was considered treason by the Ross faction and was met with outrage. The betrayal was twofold. The treaty was signed without the people's consent, and the promised money was a lie. The treaty's language explicitly stated that the $5 million would be expended, paid, and invested in a manner that included the costs of removal and emigration. This meant the Cherokee Nation's own funds were to be used by the U.S. government to pay for their forced displacement. The Cherokees chose not to fight a large-scale war because they knew it was a fight they couldn't win. Having seen the complete defeat of the Creek Nation by the U.S. Army, John Ross and other leaders understood that armed resistance would have led to the total annihilation of their people. They believed their only chance was to use the U.S. government's own legal system against it. This deliberate strategy of peaceful legal resistance was ultimately undermined by the U.S. government's desperation. Principal Chief John Ross, representing the vast majority of the Cherokee people, refused to sign any treaty that would cede their lands. The government's plan backfired, as they had created a single leader who would not cooperate with their demands. This forced the U.S. government to abandon its own rules and resort to a desperate act of deception. Instead of dealing with the legitimate government of the Cherokee Nation, they signed the fraudulent treaty with the Minority Treaty Party, a small faction that had no legal authority to speak for the Cherokee people. This disregard for the Cherokee government's authority exposed the hypocrisy of the U.S. government's entire approach and became the final legal justification for their actions. In 1838, the U.S. Army began the forced removal, an event now known as the Trail of Tears, in which thousands died. The military was needed to carry out the removal because the vast majority of the Cherokee people refused to leave their land voluntarily. The treaty gave the Cherokee 2 years to leave, but when that deadline passed, President Martin Van Buren ordered the U.S. Army to forcibly remove the remaining people. The military effort was initially commanded by General John E. Wool, who was reluctant to enforce the harsh order and was later replaced by General Winfield Scott, who saw the operation through. They were rounded up into stockades and then forced to march westward. The money from the treaty was not a lump sum payment to the Cherokee Nation, but a fund controlled by the U.S. government. While some of the funds were disbursed for individual compensation and other costs, many of the payments were slow and some of the money was allegedly mishandled. This meant that the full amount did not directly benefit the Cherokee people, who were now paying for their own expulsion. The rage over the lost homeland came to a head in the new Indian Territory. On the morning of June 22, 1839, pro-Ross partisans assassinated 3 of the Treaty Party's leaders, Major Ridge, John Ridge, and Elias Boudinot. While Major Ridge and John Ridge were full-blooded Cherokees, they, like Boudinot, who was of mixed ancestry, were not traditionalists, but had fully embraced the assimilationist policies and economic practices of the new order. Stand Watie, who was also a target, survived because he was away. The assassinations turned the political feud into a deeply personal blood feud. The animosity erupted with the American Civil War. Chief John Ross and his followers eventually sided with the Union, while Stand Watie, driven by a desire for vengeance against the Ross faction, embraced the Confederate cause. The Cherokee Civil War was brutal, as pro-Union and pro-Confederate Cherokees fought each other, using the wider conflict to settle old scores. The final betrayal,